This month we're coinciding with a brand new DC theatrical release. As of publishing, the James Gunn Universe Supergirl movie was just released yesterday, so it's the perfect time to show you how I made my new JLU Supergirl in her long-sleeve blue outfit, as well as her surprising soulmate from the future. Let's start with the beguiling bot first. Brainiac 5. What do you get when you combine Batman, Superman, and the Joker? The greatest DCAU episodes? Why, Brainiac 5, of course. Originally, I hadn't planned to make this guy, but as I keep expanding the shelves, I keep telling more stories. Supergirl was always planned, and Brainiac here came from a combination of leftover parts and the idea to have a natural pairing with Kara. Given his inclusion in the latest DCAU Fatal 5 movie, I may even make his bald head to go next to him for full representation of that film. Let's see how we can turn these parts into the descendant of the Collector of Worlds. We'll start with prepping Joker's torso by heating it up and pulling out his rubber flower and bow tie add-ons. Next, I'll use my disc Dremel to cut his coattails off. Switch Dremel heads to the standard one to shave Batman's thick thighs down to match Brainiac's thinner look better. Heat up and pop off Batman's boots and cut the tops off using your disc Dremel again. Time to switch to epoxy and begin sculpting over Joker's open coat in the front. Next, I'll add bagginess to his coat sleeves since Brainiac has a looser shirt, and then I'll epoxy his boot turns down in place since that shin cut would stand out otherwise. For the head, we'll want to Dremel the poof of Superman's hair down, and then Dremel any cured epoxy down thinner on his body if needed. Back to epoxy, you can reshape his hair to add some bangs, and then add a shoulder piece element with a larger piece. Place it on and cut around to get the shapes you need. For the belt, instead of fighting epoxy to get thin enough and wrap around him, I'm going to use figure twist ties and rubber. Straighten out the twist ties, and then cut them to size and glue them onto his waist. The rubber I mentioned will be an easier and more durable way to make those light gray rectangles he has. Measure or guesstimate the size you might need, and then cut and glue those in place on top of your twist ties. Okay, that should be all you need before you can start painting him. Brainiac 5 is primarily a fuchsia jumpsuit with black and gray bits, blue skin, and blonde hair. I'll start with the blue skin on his head and hands. Next, the first of many coats for his jumpsuit. I don't think I can recommend this exact brand and color of paint because it seriously took more than 10 coats to get full coverage in some spots. I'm not sure why it was so bad, but I'm assuming this is wildly watered down because that's really terrible. Anyway, I'll be doing my usual self-shading on his black parts, so I'll start with the gray highlights as the base. After the gray dries, come back in with your black on top to form the shapes of the highlights. Get his blonde hair on, and then use that same yellow for his Legion ring. Get out your black paint pen to scribe the trademark L symbol on that ring, and then using the same pen, come up to his face and draw on his features. The last thing is his light gray belt with white dots for details. Alright, he's all set. Now let's make his partner from the past. JLU Supergirl. Supergirl's recipe was another one that made me go back and forth quite a bit due to the slightly larger scale of the Justice League figures and the varying ways she was drawn in the animation. Ultimately, I settled on a BTAS Batgirl torso with BTAS Catwoman arms, a TNBA Robin cape, and a Gods and Monsters Wonder Woman head. I was originally thinking a Roxy head would work, but I didn't want that big grin since she was more serious in this costume. Plus, it would give her even further variation from the original STAS figure. Let's see how to turn these parts into the older Kara. I'll start by dremeling off Batgirl's belt and gloves. The belt can use the regular Dremel tip, but I'll heat up and remove her forearms. To disc Dremel cut the tops of her gloves down flat. I'll be using a cast of the Wonder Woman head, so there won't be nearly as much dremeling on it compared to if you were using an officially produced one. For epoxy, I'll start by joining her forearms together to reduce that distracting articulation cut once she loses the gloves. Just mix and roll a small amount and then wrap it around that joint. Smear it down with your finger as you wrap it, and then use water to smooth the smear even more and blend it in better. Cover that trench around her neck that came from removing her cape and blend that up with water too. Another detail would be the costume line just below her neck where her suit ends and her cape tucks in. It only takes a very small amount of epoxy, and you'll want to blend the bottom down while you cut the top across. The sides will essentially be covered by the cape a little, so those can just blend in too. Dremel and sand any of that down if it's too thick, and then place some epoxy down on her chest to cut that familiar S-shield diamond. I was going to cut the S pattern into it like I normally would, but feared it would be too small to achieve with my X-Acto knife, so I put it down a little thicker than needed. I'll Dremel it down instead so it's nice and thin to simply then paint the S on later. Create the bottom of her shirt the same way we just made the top up by the cape, and then Dremel it down to get it to look thinner. For her legs, I'm going to remove that articulation the same way I did for her arms because Supergirl's boots are lower than Catwoman's boots. I'm going to superglue the joints down in place first because it's much easier to cover with epoxy that way, and I totally should have thought of that before. While I'm here, I'm going to remove those knee joint pins by wrapping epoxy around the pin, letting it cure, Dremeling, then covering the ring with an epoxy dome that then also gets Dremeled after curing. If you do it right and the epoxy stays out of the joint, then it should all still work perfectly and be gone from sight. Nice! Her head needs gaps covered on her face where Wonder Woman's armor plates were, and then I need to do something about her hair. I have a Super 7 G.I. Joe Baroness figure that I bought for a different custom a couple years ago, and she came with extra heads. I think this hair could work out well for Kara with a little trimming and dremeling. To test fit, heat up and remove the hair, and then mark the extruded piece with paint and push the new head in there. You should be able to pull the head out and see where you need to Dremel a little valley in the middle. I'll start with a disc and then switch to a cone, and it fits. Alright, now I'll sadly Dremel all of this nicely sculpted hair detail away to get it to look more animated. Also take down the thickness on the underside after trimming portions of it off here and there. Okay, that's looking like it'll work nicely with a little help from filler and green stuff. I used some epoxy for the top and back, and then switched to green stuff for the bangs and side curls on her face. For the cape, I'll kind of guess where the opening should be, mark it with my white paint pen, and then cut it out with my X-Acto knife. It needs to be a little wider, so I'll trim the inside with some scissors. Like her hair, I'll finish it off by adding the folded cape details with some more green stuff. But I won't realize that until I start painting, so more on that in a bit. Her skirt is going to be a little tougher than the average skirt since it appears rather flowy in the show. I'll start with a guess on my paper sheet for the prototype, cut it out, and it's too short and too wide. That's why I use paper first so I don't waste rubber or foam getting the size right. Let's try that again with the first size as my base this time. And not quite. I'll need to extend the overall width to get it to meet in the back appropriately. That's better. Okay, I'll primer with some dull coat first before gluing the foam skirt on. Actually, I think I should paint her too, before the gluing. That would make more sense to keep excess paint off the skirt. For her colors, we'll need the standard Superman primary color scheme and her skin and blonde hair. I'll start with her skin since that's the bottommost layer, and then move on to her blue shirt. Next, I'll do her red boots and cape. Here is where I realize I missed the cape fold, but will only do it on the right shoulder since her left is covered by her hair. Simply mix a small amount of some green stuff, flatten it down to cover the end of the cape, and then smear it in and down on the back. Next, I'll do her blonde hair with this yellow. Clean up her eyes by scraping the peach off of the whites, and then paint in her blue eyes. Lastly, the black details on her face, her red lips, and the classic S-shield very carefully on her chest with yellow and then red. Now we can glue the skirt on and make any extra alterations to get it to fit just right. Paint the yellow belt and the red on the skirt, and she's all done. She looks awesome. I always liked Kara's original white t-shirt look, but when she embraced her cousin's standard look, it really felt right. Here she is with the first look that DC Collectibles gave us, and now with her chosen futuristic mate. Sweet! 2 more JLU characters to add to the shelves. That's all for today. Thanks for watching. Next month is finally the video the wonderful guy has been waiting for. That's right, I have the footage back to show you the video I had planned to make months ago for JLU John Stewart and Booster Gold. I'm really happy with how they both turned out, so come back and see how I made them. Thanks again for checking this video out today, and go explore my catalog of shorts and videos after this. My Instagram link is in the description if you want to see even more customs and some neat photos of them. Feel free to like and subscribe to get notified for everything, and then hit the hype button down below if you'd like to help me grow. Have a good one, and happy customizing.